Hello and welcome to the Subsurface Talks podcast. My name is DJ and I'm a 3D artist. I'm running this podcast to talk with interesting guests from the 3D art community. In this episode, I'm talking with Midge Sinnaeve, visual artist VJ from Belgium. Also released a course for motion graphics on the Blender market. He recently created a video for Korn for the song Worst Is On Its Way, and we'll be discussing this in the second part of this episode. The interview is split into two parts. The podcast is available on YouTube in a video and audio format, as well as a regular podcast format in the podcasting platforms such as Spotify and others. Without further ado, let's jump straight into the episode. Hello everyone, this is DJ and this is Subsurface Talks, and today I have a very special guest with me, a 3D artist, visual artist, VJ from Belgium, Antwerp, Mr. Midge Sinnaeve. So, Midge, welcome to the show.
Hello. I'll look into the camera for this bit so I can at least introduce myself real quick. So I'm Midge. I guess visual artist would be the best way to describe me at this point because I don't do just 3D. I do other stuff as well. But yeah, we know each other through the Blender community. I've been using Blender for God knows how long at this point. I don't know, coming up to 10 years, I would say. Getting there. I don't know if it's quite 10 yet, but definitely 7, 8, something like that. So, but yeah, I do all kinds of stuff generally for the music industry. So think album covers, music videos, VJ loops, that kind of thing. But really, any project that sort of interests me that comes by, I'm happy to be a part of. So.
Yeah, so Midge is, as you can see, very humble as a 3D artist, as an artist. And one thing that I will surely bring up during the show will be that he quite recently has done a video for a very big band called Korn. So if anyone knows this, very niche band, I think it's huge, and it's very exciting to talk about this and also other weird shit. How Mitch likes to describe his art.
Yeah. I think I make weird shit. I put that on one of my social media things years ago, and it just sort of stuck. And I think it describes what I do best. I don't know. There's not much of a theme other than it being a little bit out there most of the time, I think. So yeah, I mean, I guess if you have any questions, just go for it, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, I'm hoping for the best conversation because I'm also kind of like interested in music. I used to be a musician myself, back in the days, and I find it like sometimes people get it like it's not common to kind of like have these two in the area of interest, like being a visual artist and a musician. But I happen to know a lot of people who actually like dig into both of those spaces and or somehow like mix them all together.
Yeah, I grew up playing guitar and being in bands and stuff, so I have a little bit of a music background, but very, very non-conformist. I'm pretty sure I still play guitar in ways that music teachers would get really sick of when they saw me doing. The more like punk rock, stoner rock, that kind of stuff is what I was into when I was younger. So it's funny that you say that of the music and visual people mixing. It's one of my pet peeves, I think, when I go to concerts and you see a lot of even bigger artists that just have very basic, simple visuals. And that always makes me irrationally angry because I'm like, even with a small budget, you can do truly amazing things. But they don't, it's something that when I was switching over to making a lot of stuff for the music industry, one of the reasons I switched is I wanted to work with creative people rather than things like marketing agencies or more corporate people. Not that there's anything bad about them. I just felt that the way I think and the way I do stuff, it was just a better mix to find other people that are creative. And I sort of half expected to find, what's the best way to put this? People that like knew what they wanted, were very involved in the process, that kind of thing. But it turned out that I think some of them had even less of a clue than some of the even more corporate clients that I used to work for. They're just like, oh, we like your stuff. It looks cool. We want one of yours for us. And I'm like, okay. So it can bring a lot of freedom, but also, yeah, there's always a danger in people almost knowing what they want or not really knowing what they want, is that there's a lot of room for interpretation. And throughout the years, my way of working has changed a lot as I've gotten older, and I guess more confident in my work is the best way to put it. I don't like feedback rounds. I don't like whatever. I'm just like, look, just give me a deadline. It'll be finished. I'll have it to you by then. It'll be done. Don't worry about it. And thankfully, most of the time, people can appreciate it. But yeah, there's always people that expect you to send all kinds of works in progress. And to me, that kind of, yeah, it doesn't help because then they have opinions. Obviously, if the clients request it, it's something I take into my workflow in advance, and I'll try to plan it in to make sure that I have stuff that I can show them. But the last couple of years, especially, I've been trying not to show any sort of viewport animation renders or anything that isn't rendered and at least comped ever so slightly, because it adds to the confusion for people that don't know the process. I mean, you're a 3D artist yourself. You know what it's like when you show somebody something that you maybe modeled and it's all gray in the viewport, and they're like, "Cool, but where are the colors?"
Yeah. That's a pain, and yeah, I guess the freedom of creative space, as you said, like it's always like it's hard because there's almost like too much possibilities, right? So people
Mm-hmm.
can expect too much, and I find that myself as well, that sometimes constraints are really helpful in the creative process. Like if you have like
Mm-hmm.
specific limitations or
Definitely.
scope that's more defined, it really helps, and it doesn't
Yeah, a
limit
lot of work.
creativity, in fact.
No, sometimes because I think what it is if you have too many tools at your disposal, like it's something different if you're doing like a Hollywood movie or whatever, and you really need all these different things. But just for little things that you do yourself or smaller projects, it can help to be like, all right, this is the tool set. It can't change. That's it. And I have to find ways to push it as far as I can. And there's a lot of fun in that, I think. A lot of problem solving, a lot of trying different things. I really enjoy that. Yeah, it, it's a bit of a trope, I think, at this point. A lot of people say it. Constraint breeds creativity. I think it's a two-way street. I think you don't always need the constraints, but they do help if you're having a tough time figuring something out. So for me, the way I use it is whenever I'm doing something and it's not working, or I don't feel like it looks good or whatever, I tend to just bring it back to basics and just kind of take a few steps back and be like, okay, what do I want from this? Because especially for something like a music video, I think I only recently discovered, let's say in the last 2 to 3 years, that it's probably my favorite type of thing to make. I did VJ loops for a long time, and they're a lot of fun, but they're short clips, and you can kind of push things, but it has to loop. And looping things is fun, and again, it's another limitation. So you start thinking differently about things. But then the first time I was able to make a music video, I was like, wait a second, I can do whatever I want. It's basically an experimental short film, and sometimes you get lucky and the song is about 3 minutes, and sometimes you get unlucky and the song is about 6 minutes. Look at you, electronic music producers.
Well, don't start me on some prog rock stuff and you go over
Oh
10
yeah,
minutes
that's
or
even
20
way
minutes.
worse. Yeah, it's insane. But yeah, so most of the music videos I've done are like between 3 and 6 minutes, I would say. So it's fun, and generally, the thing I was trying to get at is that whole idea of constraining yourself and like breaking things down is a lot of people, and I think this is because CG mostly comes from things like the film industry, advertising industry. People, they write a script, they make the animatic, they do the whole process, and I can't stand that. It bores me to no end, because pre-production is fun, post-production is fun, and everything in between for me is just hell, because it's like, all right, now we've written out these 100 shots and you just need to make them, and it doesn't gel well with me. So the way I usually do stuff is I just start making shit. Oh, sorry. Can we swear on this podcast?
Yes,
I
we can.
didn't
Like,
ask that one before.
this is.
Okay, I'll try to keep it family friendly. Sorry about that. I just start making stuff, and then just make shot after shot after shot, and then at some point, one of the renders is like, "This is it. Yeah, this looks good. I like this," and I almost work from like the middle out, where that might be a key shot maybe somewhere the first half or second half of the music video, and then in my mind suddenly the story starts forming on both ends, and I just sort of work towards it. I have that luxury because I'm on my own. Obviously, if I were to work with people, I think that would be an unmitigated disaster. um, but yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, first take away the constraints, see what happens, and then once you've found what you need, you can put them back on, and then push things forward, and then get sort of creative with what you've built, or the idea that you've built from the ground up. So if that makes sense at all. I feel like I'm already rambling, and we're like 10 minutes in.
Yeah, that's okay. I guess this is like a good taste of what the conversation will be probably. So we'll be talking about all the creative stuff, and I'm hoping that most of our listeners are people that are truly interested in the process and in the creative stuff. So yeah, let's not worry about the family friendly stuff too much. From the stats, I think the viewers are mostly like grown ups, like from 20 up
Okay.
to 40 something.
I won't do it on purpose, but I'll
Like
that's
this
fair.
is a core audience, I guess, like from what I know, at least for now.
Okay.
So let's maybe go back to the beginning once more. Like you said a little bit about
Sure.
your musical background, like all the creative that you didn't really want to work so much for the corporate side of things for some reason. So can you tell us like a little bit of a background story, how you got to doing art in general, 3D in particular, and
Oof.
Blender at the end? Like why Blender and
Okay.
how it
I
happened?
guess I'll start at the beginning, but I'll keep that short because we're talking about when I was trying to even think what age, 11, 12, 13, something like that. I think it's a very typical story for a lot of digital artists our age. Computer entered the house, and it could do cool stuff, basically. And because my dad bought a Mac instead of a PC, I couldn't play a lot of video games, but we did have Photoshop, and sort of that's where it all started. So I started out doing a lot of Photoshop stuff, just a lot of 2D, and then did some After Effects as well, Live Motion, which was like Adobe's competitor to Flash back in the day before they bought Flash. That was a lot of fun. It was basically like After Effects but for Flash, which was kind of cool. And then slowly but surely started getting into 3D. Uh, I think the first application I ever used was called Strata 3D. It still exists. It's not like a AAA application, but it's still around. It's still doing its thing. It still looks exactly the same as, like, what is that, 25 years ago now, something like that. So it's funny. Got it on one of those CDs you got with a magazine back in the day. You'd buy the computer magazine, then you get a CD with demos. And I remember one point when I was like 16-ish. Long story short, I think it was my 5 or 6 for the first time they had a personal learning edition, and I got my hands on it, installed it on my little iMac at home. It took like 45 minutes to install, another 20 minutes to boot up. It was insane how slow it was. Looked at the UI, and I was like, no, too stupid for this. I'm going to go do something else. And for a long time, while I dabbled in Cinema 4D for the most part, for the longest time, I thought it was honestly just too dumb for CG. I know it sounds really stupid now looking back at it, because I kind of hit myself. It's like, dude, if you would have just stuck with it, you would have been doing it so much longer. You would have been even better by now. you know? But hey, sometimes it just doesn't gel with you. And then by the time I was finishing college, I ended up doing 3D. So we had 3 years. I had 3 years of college, or like I had multiple years, but like in my third year of that course, I had to pick between audiovisual productions, so filming cameras, live and offline, web design, or CG animation. And initially, I'd picked audio video, just audiovisual productions, and a friend of mine as well. And after we came back after summer break, the I went to him and I sort of confessed to him, like, I think I'm going to learn more doing CG, and I kind of want to do that. And he's like, oh, I'm so happy you said that. I want to do the same thing. So that's when it really, really started picking up, when I started doing it properly in college. Up at that point, I still messed with it and I played around with it. Quite a bit. I was on DeviantArt quite a bit, and you had like the abstract renders within the Photoshop edits, that kind of stuff. I was into all that kind of thing, and it looked kind of cool. And then got into it more seriously, got a job in the industry as a visual effects and environment artist. I was using 3ds Max at that point. And then after 4 or 5 years of being in film industry, motion graphics, that kind of thing, I decided I wanted to do my own thing. And that was around the time 3ds Max went subscription and I had to buy a license. And I was like, 150 euros a month? I don't know. Seems a bit much for one application. And that sort of started my journey looking at everything. And I gave myself 2 weeks with each application. Tried out all the different ones, Maya, Lightwave, Modo, Houdini. I don't know if I knew about Houdini back then yet, but anyway, tried out all of the major ones, and then finally settled on the fact that I still like 3ds Max the most because I was really comfortable with it. And then I think another week after that, I realized, I hadn't tried Blender. Installed it, unzipped it. That was already like mind blowing. After doing the usual Autodesk installs that took like 20 minutes, double clicked it, it started instantly, and I was just hooked. It had a somewhat similar modifier system to 3ds Max, and that was it. I was done. I was like, wow, I can do just about everything in here. It's free, runs on everything, and then down the rabbit hole I went, I guess. So
yeah, that's a big difference. Like I had also experience with 3ds Max, and like the installing part is like, some people say that this is just done so you have the respect for the software that it's something big, because it installs so long.
But it's so slow, and it's still to this day, it's still that slow, and I just don't understand. It's like somebody created it once 20 years ago, and nobody dares to touch it. They're just like, just put the new files in. It's fine.
I think there's some truth in it. Like they have to keep a lot of stuff like legacy code and stuff. They don't have that luxury that Blender has, that it could rewrite stuff from scratch and just dump everything.
The only reason they have that luxury is because you can go to the Blender website and download any version that's ever been released, right? You can't do that with the other ones. So it's like you're perpetually kind of stuck in this cycle. And yeah, I just didn't like that idea. Mind you, I was paying for all the Adobe stuff back then because I still used quite a lot of it. But I remember being at a conference and like having people from Autodesk there explaining all this stuff, and me kind of going like, okay, so on one hand you've got like, what is it, 50 or 60 euros for everything Adobe makes versus 150 for just 3ds Max, and they just couldn't understand that to a lot of people wasn't really a good value proposition. So, and I don't hate other 3D applications, don't get me wrong. I hate the business models around them. I think some of them are very just ancient and weird, and they don't have very good relationships with a lot of their smaller customers, unfortunately. But other than that, I mean, they're all trying to solve the same problem, right? It's all just CG under the hood. It's just all polygons and polygons, pixels, vertices, you name it. So
yeah. And Blender really actually started the same way, as a commercial software, and just turned open source throughout some lucky events.
Some smart thinking by one Dutch man.
Yeah, and I guess there's some love involved. Like he just didn't want to part with his kind of baby.
Thank God he didn't.
Yeah, lucky for all of us Blender people, Blender cultists. So let's.
It's going to be, what is it? What was it? 30 years?
30 years. 30 years. Early, it's like right now January. They are doing like
wild
funding,
a big
fundraiser,
funding drive. Yeah, I saw it. It's cool.
So another question, like I introduced you as Midge Sinnaeve, but you have also like a nickname that you're using, the Mantissa.
Yeah,
so people might know you by this handle.
I gave that to myself at some point because I thought it sounded cool, and forever I'm in that zone where it's like, is it cool? Isn't it cool? I don't know. My name is unique enough to where if you just Googled me, you'd find me every single time. And yet, I don't know. I can't quite let go of it because I think it still sounds cool to this day. It's just a math term, actually. I believe it's the decimal part of a logarithmic number, if I'm correct.
Yep.
And I remember being in some college class and hearing that word. I was like, that's one of the coolest words I've ever heard. So there's the origin of that.
I did a little bit of research on that. Like it's a math term, but there's also like a musical band that's named the Mantissa.
Yeah.
It's like a grunge band from the 90s, an Australian band.
Only found out way after. So the reason I picked that name initially was when I started my website, I started a blog, and I felt like it represented, because it's like the decimal part of something, it's sort of the leftover bit in my mind. And I was trying to write blog articles that were interesting for like edge cases, little things nobody else was trying to look into. Unfortunately, that blog is long gone. I think you can still find it on the Wayback Machine. Um, so that's where the name sort of came from. And then that all just sort of morphed into me using it online everywhere. And I don't know. It is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like this kind of also gives impression that some of you, about your art, like if you even look at your website, which is Mantissa XYZ, right?
Hmm.
So I really like this ending part. Like XYZ is like a popular domain
Hmm.
kind of ending, but it fits with the 3D stuff that we do
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
very very well. And like the mantissa is also like a math term, and I'm thinking that it's really quite relatable to your art, because it's like a lot of it is like very I'd say very
Generative,
generative, like
procedural.
procedural
Yeah.
abstract
Yeah.
stuff
It's,
that has a lot of math in it, like by
well,
design.
but the reality is that I'm not that good at math. Like, I figured it out visually and I know what to use. And I think CG has taught me more about math than, I don't want to necessarily say math class, because I did enjoy it when I was younger and I was okay at it, but I never had like an active interest in it. And again, it's one of those things, right? You look back at your 16-year-old self. It's like, not only should you have stuck with Maya, you should have learned how to program. You should have taken better care in your math classes. But you're a 16-year-old. What do you care? You're too busy doing other stuff. And for me, that was still just trying to make cool shit on my computer. Like, I joke, where it all started for me. My biggest joke is that I just wanted a wallpaper that I made myself, right? Like a desktop wallpaper. But it's kind of true. To me, it always struck me as odd that we're all just kind of, you know, using the default wallpaper. And I was a Mac user back then, so they were pretty cool. But I was like, I want to make something cool myself. And I think, even though I jokingly say it, a lot of my drive is still sort of that comes from there. It's like, but I want to do it myself. I want to figure out how it works. I want to see how these things fit together, and whether it's about making a piece of art, or trying to edit something together, or just getting into the weeds with something like geometry nodes. I want to know. I just want to see if I can figure it out. Um, so I'm in that sense, I'm very self-taught. Obviously, with YouTube now, it's you can learn anything, which is awesome, but you still need to find a drive or a project, or something you want to do with it, I find, before you can really start learning. So
Let's maybe talk about the art that you're doing a little bit.
sure.
A lot of it is like abstract art, like experiments with
Hmm.
what you can do with a mesh, and just create some interesting looking forms and give it some
Yep,
shading and lighting, just to make it look visually appealing. That's how, at least how I
exactly.
get it. Uh, so I want to talk about the art, and also about the how do you really make a living out of this kind of stuff. Was it really hard to transition? You said you got the work in the industry before you switched to making your own stuff and doing the VJ
Hmm.
stuff. Like, how hard it was for you to just like keep on doing your own personal stuff
Hmm.
and just making a living out of it.
It's a double-edged sword. I think most people that have transitioned will tell you that. It's both awesome and nerve-wracking. In the beginning, it was still a lot of, I would get hired because I was able to do X or Y or Z. So when I first started doing freelance stuff, it was still a lot of motion graphics, um, and that there's quite a bit of work in that. But it was still just very much getting hired for my skills rather than my style, if you want to call it that. I still don't 100% know myself what my style is, but I can definitely see things come out in a certain way every single time. Obviously, some luck and a lot of hard work. It's a boring answer, but it is true. You have to persist. Make sure I made sure that when I started freelancing, I didn't do it with an empty pocket. That I had enough money to keep me afloat for 6 months or so. I started working freelance next to my day job at first as well to kind of build up a little bit of clientele, try to find people to work with. So it was very gradual. It's not like I just one day decided I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to do this full time. And throughout my freelance career, I've always had stuff going on the sides. Like I would teach 1 or 2 days a week, or I would do some consulting for some smaller studios that were building a pipeline and just wanted some insight into how I would build it, that kind of thing. So most of the time, I've freelanced, but it's somewhat subsidized by slightly longer term projects. Like during COVID, I had a project where I designed footwear based on people's scans that was 3D printed, and that was like a 1 to 2 day a week thing for about a year and a half. Right now, I'm working at a nonprofit, kind of doing game development of all things. So I'm learning a lot about game development right now and doing that. So I always have something else going on. Full-time freelance for me is a bit much in the sense that I'm not the most organized person. So if I have one thing that makes me enough money that kind of covers all the basics, that just pays the bills, then all the freelance stuff is for a better computer or stuff that I want but don't necessarily need. And that's a really good motivator because it's like then I can be a bit more selective in the jobs that I take on rather than being fully dependent on every single job coming in. Because I'm also a terrible communicator, unfortunately. In front of people, I can talk to people really well. I can understand them. Definitely with clients, I understand what they want pretty quickly, I think. But when it comes to emails and messages and all the social media platforms, I'm just the worst because I'd rather be doing something, I don't know, doing something, creating something rather than sitting on Twitter all day. So that's why I'm terrible at, yeah, answering people. Even emails, I'm just not very good at answering
Yeah,
people at
that's
times. A lot of people say hi now, and it's really nice, and I super appreciate it. So if you haven't had an email from me back, I apologize. But if you are listening, I do care about you. I do appreciate you saying hi and sending things.
yeah. So, sounds like you need a good secretary of some sort,
Or
some
an agent or
agent,
something like
right?
that. I've honestly considered it. I think if I would get somebody to do all that side of the business and they could just tell me, all right, you've got 3 weeks to make a music video, kind of like this, go. I'd be like, all right, cool. And I can just focus on that. That would be amazing. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I'm well known enough for that kind of stuff yet. I haven't looked into it yet. And like I said, I've always had these side gigs. And I think it's a good thing because if it's just you sitting at your computer 5, 6 days a week, and let's be honest, as a freelancer, it's not always 8 days. It's usually 10 or 12, sometimes even 14. Um, Now that I have a kid, it's different. Before that, it was 14-hour days almost every day because, it's cool and all that kind of stuff. And my wife loves me and she understands, which is amazing. But at the same time, yeah, it's time to pump the brakes a little bit, figure out what's next. I've noticed that I've started working a little bit differently as well. A lot less time at the computer, more time thinking about stuff before I actually touch the computer, that kind of thing. But it still feels like I don't have enough hours in the day to do everything I want to do. It's tough.
Yeah, curse of the creative people, I guess.
I think so. Yeah, you can't help it. Your brain is just on most of the time, and yeah, I'm cursed with this idea of productivity. I think it's a little bit it's bad in the sense that work-life balance is something I'm very much learning now that I'm getting older and I have a lot more responsibilities. I wish I learned it like 10 years ago, but yeah, things like boundaries, saying no to people, that kind of thing. Yeah, if somebody has a good idea and they get me all excited, then I'm very, very eager to start doing stuff, even though I should be doing other stuff. And I don't know. It's tough, you know. You always want to be working on the project that you're not supposed to be working on. I'm sure other people have felt that as well. So,
Yeah, and right now we're kind of
yeah.
approaching the new year, and like
Hmm.
a typical moment for people to reflect on what they achieved or
Hmm.
like, and making plans for the new year. Always like I make myself some plans, and usually like maybe I don't know 30% of that gets done really of the ideas. I don't know if it's 30%. I don't like have exact numbers,
Oh,
but
I don't.
it's below 50.
No. What does work for me though is every 3 to 6 months. It's been a little bit longer now because of I moved a year ago and things are still in disarray somehow. But is sort of looking back at all my files, cleaning everything up for the last like 6 months or year, and then just kind of putting everything neatly, archiving it all. And then you do get a sense of like, okay, I have been creative. I have done quite a lot of things. It's not that I'm just sitting here, because you get lost in that stream of creation very easily to where you think, I can make something and then 5 minutes later, I think it's a total piece of shit. You know what I mean? And in a sense, it's just wanting to move forward. But sometimes it's good to go back and just kind of look at things and be like, okay, I've made some cool shit. There's nothing wrong with this. This is good. There's progression. And that's for me the main thing that I want to see, is that there's always progress. It's always okay, my colors are getting a little bit better, or my animation's getting a little bit better. You can see stuff sort of gradually improves. And I think we lose sight of that, because I don't know what it's like for you, but I have these sort of creative plateaus where it feels like I learn a lot in a very short time, and then I just sort of plateau for a while. And I feel like I'm just kind of repeating myself, treading water. And then suddenly some new thing comes by, or something that I hadn't heard of, or something that I found. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. And you kind of just fall into this black hole for a couple of months, and you're super creative and hyper focused, and the whole world melts away around you. And then you're like, oh shit, I need to make dinner, or I need to pay taxes, or whatever. um and then you go through that cycle of like, oh, everything I make is the same and it's all shit. And it's weird. I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. One thing I have learned throughout the years though is, everybody's way of working is valid. Everybody's different approach is completely valid. It's not because I grinded out 14-hour days for 10 years that works for somebody else. I think that's very untrue. And I think there's a lot of sort of miscommunication or misconceptions in the creative world, that there's like a way to do it or a way to become a good artist. And I don't think there's just the one. I think it's a combination of so many different things. Some you have control over, some you don't. And at the end of the day, it's for me, what has worked is just follow what inspires me. I've made so many like grids and like grid shapes and geometric stuff and whatever. And sometimes when I'm making another one of those, I'm like, ugh, are you really doing this again? But at the same time, I'm like, but I think it's cool. I think it looks cool. So this is what I should be doing. Um, I'm really scared of repeating myself, but at the same time, is style repetition? Isn't it? What is style? Like you can get into these really weird mind bending sort of philosophies. And at the end of the day, if I'm able to let it go and just do the work, that's generally when I'm happiest. So.
Yeah, I've heard like a thing. I think it was a music producer of some sort. That he said that whenever you start focusing on, I think it was Rick Rubin or someone like that,
Mm-hmm.
saying that if you're trying to make like a great record or something like that, like focusing on
Oh no.
too much, thinking about the output that you're
Yep.
trying to achieve, and not on the process of the moment of creation,
Yep.
you're lost, because you're kind of like missing the point. The point is like to be
Mm-hmm.
100% in the process, being yourself, doing what inspires you, and getting this juices flowing. And then
Yeah,
like
and
the success, the incredible work is like a byproduct of that attitude.
the weird thing as well is I've noticed this weird effect on social media where if I post something that I'm super proud of and I put a lot of thought into, and it has a lot of background and a lot of like conceptual thinking behind it, nobody gives a shit. But if I make something in like 2 hours and I was like, this looks kind of funny, and I post it online, people really connect with it. And I think sometimes people can feel that moment more than a concept, where it's like, yeah, you could tell he was in it and he just had this weird idea and he went for it, and that's cool. And obviously different things apply to different people. I think there's people on both sides that are more, that are more into concept, and other people's that are more into just the visual part of it. um I'm I mean, if I could, what's the best way to put this? If I could accuse myself and my work of one thing, is that I'm not very consistent and I don't really have big overarching ideas. But I think part of that is being an experimental artist, I'm not an artist in the more traditional sense. It's something that I struggled with when I was younger, when I would meet art students that do traditional art. They're all very conceptual and they're always thinking about everything. And it's like, it's all very serious and yeah. And to me, that always felt like, oh, I'm missing this. I'm missing this. And the moment I was able to let that go, I realized like, no, art can be just visual. It's okay. And the concepts in my art are probably very simple. If I feel bad, it gets darker. If I feel good, it gets a lot brighter and more colorful. And if that's it, then I'm fine with that. I'm happy with that. It's a reflection of who I am in that moment. And I think that to me is the most important part of making art. Um, and I think the people that like my art connect with that idea more than maybe some of the other ideas surrounding art. And none of them are bad. I think all of them are equal. If anything, the internet has taught me that there's a niche for everyone. And if you can be a part of that community, you know, I once was described by somebody because whenever, I've spoken at conferences and they're like, write a bio. And I'm like, I don't know, Midge is a guy who sits at his computer and makes art. Like, it doesn't real much bigger than that for me. It never has. And the moment I try to make it bigger, I get frustrated and it's no fun. Um, so I once had somebody else like, how would you describe me? And they told me I was an underground experimental digital artist. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. I can see that because, yeah, underground in the sense that I'm not that well known, which is fine. I don't really give a shit about that. I think within my circle of people, I think a lot of the people that follow me respect what I do, and I get a lot of really great. I have a small community, but it's really friendly and nice, and I like that about it. Um, and obviously, the experimental part is, yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to make going in most of the time. And that's okay. I think, other people work the other way around. Again, it comes down to all this stuff. It's all valid. It's just try to figure out what works for you, and kind of what you keep going back to, and that kind of drives me forward most of the time. And the longer projects that I work on, they are tough because I have to fit in a box, and that's really hard. Sometimes people are like, we want specifically this, and it's like, I can do it, but I really don't want to. And circling back a little bit to things like style and talking about freelancing, for me the biggest shift was the first time I ever got a pitch sent to me, which was all my work, where they're like, we like these, we want more of this. And that's also really weird because you're like, oh wow, my work is good enough for them to pitch something. Obviously it's to me, so but that means it's maybe been in other pitch decks around the world here and there. Maybe somebody picked something of mine up and was like, hey, this is cool. And that's nice to know, but that's both a compliment and a complete mindfuck. Because then you're like, oh, style, what's my style? They want it in my style. What do they mean by that? And you start looking at your own work and you're like, I don't know, more cubes and stuff. More faces. I have no idea, It gets really weird.
That's the end of the first part of the interview. If you liked it, listen to the next one, which is called Weird is on its way, and we'll be discussing Midge's video that he's done for Korn for the song Worst is on its way. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends.